My Jewish birthday is the 7th day of Kislev, so that was last Thursday. My Gregorian secular birthday is November 19th. So we decided that Tuesday, November 16th was smack in the middle, perfect date. But given that I have a book that's coming out right now, and given that during COVID we've all not seen each other for so long, we decided this is the perfect time to kind of bring everyone together and do a joint book launch and birthday party. Also, now that I'm publishing my 36th book, thank God, and don't be that impressed because many have sold 36 copies, I figured that I've got to leverage all of my close friendships and the people that I admire to talk about the book on my birthday to make me always feel that 55 years old, 36 books, let's focus on the 36 instead of the 55. That was like a great distraction. So I asked my very dear friend, Bret of the New York Times, who is hovering above me in the ether, I asked him if he would join me on a panel to discuss the book, and he said, of course, because Bret's such a good friend. I also have a lot of compromising information about him that makes it impossible for him to say no. But then Bret calls me and says to me, guess what? I tested positive. As an optimist, that he's extremely positive about life and about everything. I said that's a good thing. Anyway, but Bret is coming out of his positiveness, but he had a 10-day quarantine period, so he's joining us from Upper New York State. How are you feeling, Bret?
I'm fine, Shmuley. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person.
Yeah, you look like you're really upset about it.
I'm devastated.
And then I told my very dear friend Elisha Wiesel, who's the former Chief Information Officer at Goldman Sachs, and everyone knows he's Elie Wiesel's son. And Elisha and I have done many panels together. And Elisha is someone I really look up to on all moral matters, and Elisha is someone who is very good at finding endless reasons for me to feel like I need to be a better person. I knew that he would enjoy a conversation with Kosher Hate. I asked Elisha to join us, and he agreed as well, and I'm very grateful. I should mention that my wife and I were recently, 2 weeks ago, we were in Washington, D.C., where the National Cathedral unveiled a special carving of Elie Wiesel that is now one of the first things you see as you walk into the National Cathedral. I'm guessing that everyone who attended Colin Powell's funeral saw it with Elie Wiesel, Rosa Parks, Mother Teresa. And that was a great honor. And Elisha that night gave one of the best speeches I've heard in years. One of the most courageous defenses of Israel that I've ever heard. It really was such an uplifting night. And I said, well, if you can give it for the Christians, you can give it for the Jews as well. So I'm so grateful for my dear friend Elisha joining us. Very quick hellos, and then we're going to get started. First of all, I want to welcome my very dear friend of 30 years, Dan Raviv. CBS News, I-24, God knows, so many world-renowned, legendary reporter, came up from Washington, D.C. for this. I'm really, really grateful. And you and I know each other from my Oxford years. When you used to come and, but you haven't aged a day.
Neither of you, especially your energy level.
That's very true. I'm glad you noticed that. Gosh, I have former Oxford student friends that are here. Maurizio Giuliano, who works for the UN. It's great to see you. But especially so many friends, I'll get to all of them, but I want to especially welcome my wife Debbie and all of our children, and we're going to get started. So the book is called Kosher Hate, and let me begin with a question to Bret. I wrote Kosher Hate. This is like the strangest thing. I always looked up to you, but now I'm really looking up to you. You're not here in the restaurant. You're right above me, because he's also in front of me. Bret, I wrote Kosher Hate, subtitled How to Fight Jew Hatred, Racism, and Bigotry, because I believe that our Christian brothers and sisters' emphasis on turning the other cheek and loving your enemy has been profoundly misunderstood. Jesus said that you should love your enemy. He never said that you should love God's enemy. There's a big difference. Your enemy is the guy that takes your parking place. God's enemy is a terrorist. God's enemy are the Nazis. How did we ever think we could love someone like that? And turning the other cheek means turning the other cheek to a petty slight. You don't turn the other cheek to a pervasive sense of evil. I think that our demonization of hatred towards evil has tied one of our hands behind our back so that we don't sufficiently fight evil. That's the essential argument of the book, and the book is half theology, discussing New Testament theology, why I think it's mistaken, that people misunderstood what Jesus was saying because it was all based on Jewish teachings. We'll save that for another time. And the other part is political. I demonstrate that Lincoln said he hated slavery, use that terminology. We all remember that George H.W. Bush, 41st President of the United States, said that he hated Saddam Hussein. Churchill said that he hated Hitler. He used those words. I could go on. Hatred is not part of the lexicon because we all hate hatred, but I kind of want to resurrect it in a kosher form. What do you think, Bret?
Well, I do think that, the word hate, I think, is used, at least in a lot of ordinary discourse, a little too cavalierly. And I think we actually have a scourge of hating our opponents, hating people who disagree with us, hating adversaries or competitors. And that's a real civic problem in the United States. So that's one thing. I don't want to kosherize that kind of hate. Alternatively, though, we also live in a world in which there's, to me, a stunning quality of indifference to genuine, unmistakable, unqualified acts of evil. And, there's a famous story about A.M. Rosenthal, who, before he became executive editor of the New York Times in the late 1960s, 1970s, was a Pulitzer Prize winning correspondent for the paper in Eastern Europe, and wrote a famous story about his experience of visiting Auschwitz. As I remember this story, and there's a 5% chance I may be getting this wrong or have the wrong person in mind, but I think it was Rosenthal. Rosenthal met a farmer who lived, whose farm was on the periphery of the camp. And he asked the farmer, well, why didn't you knew that the slaughter was taking place, you knew that this was going on, why did you do nothing? And the farmer's answer was, if I prick my finger on a barbed wire, I bleed. But if someone else pricks their finger on a barbed wire, then what is it to me? And that, to me, that expression typifies the indifference to evil, which I think is really extraordinarily pervasive. People go down to Cuba routinely and come back praising, say, the quality of healthcare. Now, leaving aside the true quality of healthcare in Cuba, which is much worse than people think, what so disturbs me about that is that they can go to a place like Cuba and remain indifferent to the fact that people like José Daniel Ferrer and other dissidents are rotting in Cuban jails or under constant persecution. People go to Venezuela and, now it's changed, but at least in the early days of the Chavez regime, miss the fact that it was descending into the dictatorship that is now, and they are indifferent to hate. People do business with China, make a great deal of money from China, kowtow to Chinese mores and sensibilities and the desires of the Communist Party in all kinds of ways. And that too strikes me as a deep moral feeling. Throughout the Cold War, when I was growing up, people closed their eyes to what was happening to Natan Sharansky or to Andrei Sakharov. So that, I think, is where I think you're really on solid ground. I haven't read your book, but I suspect this is what you're really talking about. That is the kind of, if hate is the right word, perhaps there's another one, that we need more of, because we need to be clear-eyed about the reality that we live in a world in which absolute evil does exist, it does operate, it does ruin and immiserate the lives of millions of people, and we're more concerned about the situation at the Kardashian home or something like that. So there, I think, is where I think that's really, I think this is what you're getting at, Shmuley. And happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
This is where we really have to sort of take stock of where we are morally as a country, because if we become a country that is conveniently blind to atrocities going on elsewhere, will become increasingly indifferent to atrocities or other crimes as they occur closer to home.
Can I kind of like...
Wait, dare I say it? It sounded like Bret Stephens actually agreed with me. Oh my God.
Well,
Sounded like
the
you
night is
agreed
young,
with me.
Shmuley.
Okay. I'm bringing in Elisha now. I just want to welcome some other people who've walked in. My very dear friends, Sir Clive Gillinson, Anya, head of Carnegie Hall, thank you for being here. Sally Richardson, head of St. Martin's Press. Hello, Sally. Thank you for coming.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. The Consul General of Poland, our very dear friend Adrian Kubicki. And you better have brought your wife, Adrian. But Poland knows what evil's all about when they were invaded by the Nazis, 1st December 1939. But Elisha, as you respond to what Bret said, I was telling you yesterday.
Shmuley,
Yeah.
sorry, I have to interrupt.
Yeah.
They were also invaded by the Soviets. Let's not forget
Good
the
point.
massacre of Canton
Yeah, good
Forest.
point. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's why you're above me, to make sure that you fill in all the blanks.
Well, this is an important point, by the way, and it's material. I don't mean to get in the way of your question, but it's material because it's another way in which the world closes its eyes to hatred. Because there was a certain segment of the world, including in the West, that was committed to fellow traveling with the Soviet Union in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Many people, including people on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, famously closed their eyes to the atrocities taking place in the workers' paradise, in the socialist utopia. And that's, I think, another important aspect, that you have to hate more, you have to hate more than you're willing to justify it because of a certain concept of an ultimate good.
Well, Adrian's here, and you just heard that. Very interesting, huh? Because people don't focus on that, Adrian, right? That the Soviet Union also invaded Poland in September of 1939. I just welcomed you. Did you hear me? I said you better have brought. You didn't hear me. I said you better have brought your wife. Is Anna here?
No, she's not down.
Okay, well then.
That's the state of development.
Okay, I forgive you.
But I'm here.
Some people say there's tension today between Poland and the Jewish people, but Adrian's such an amazing friend, and Poles and Jews are brothers. That's always going to be the case. Thank you for coming tonight. God bless you. So before I turn it over to Elisha, so Elisha, your father was the most famous Holocaust survivor, won under the Nobel Peace Prize, and you know that I loved him and revered him, and I told you yesterday that I had a conversation with him about hatred, and he warned me. He said that I was wrong. He said that the whole idea of this book was wrong. He said that you can hate evil because you can't control the hatred in your heart. It'll expand it'll metastasize like a tumor. And I told you also that it was the only time in my entire life that I dared disagree with Elie Wiesel. And I'm so happy you're here tonight. Elisha is a Yedid Nefesh. There are a few people in the world I would say that about. He's a soul friend. We study the Talmud together every day, but he's a deeply moral man. He's an amazing buddy to me. I really like to hear your take on this.
First of all, happy birthday, Shmuley.
Thank you.
55. I will say that there are few better ways to make yourself appear unimpressive than to appear on a panel with Bret Stephens. So I'm very glad to have that great honor today. Gosh, so you want me to respond to my father's comment that
I want to hear
hatred
your
corrupts.
comment, but I want you to know what your father said. Right.
Okay. So I have a couple of thoughts on this. If you look at the way, and I'm curious because you'll have far more quotes than I will, it's interesting that in today's Daf Yomi, Shmuley and I learn a page of Gemara today, every day together. We didn't get to do it together, so I went ahead. But there was a comment on the expectation that a Torah scholar sometimes will appear very angry. And you're supposed to be understanding, it says in the Daf. You're supposed to be understanding because it's the Torah within him that has animated him and made him so passionate and angry. But right after it says this statement, it was almost a perfect setup for tonight. There's a pause, and then it says, but you should learn to control yourself nonetheless. So there's a rebuke that's applied as well. You have even Moses, and it's not even hatred, it's just anger. He lashes out at a rock, frustrated with the people of Israel, and there's a punishment for that too. So there seems to be a pretty consistent message that negative emotions, which dominate reason, have a consequence that is negative. Whereas it's a bit more mixed in terms of what we might consider to be positive emotions. You think of Saul being compassionate to the king of Amalek that he defeats in battle, but he's unwilling to kill him. It's unclear why, but he's unwilling. He feels compassion for his enemy, and he's chided for that. He actually loses his kingship over this. Whereas on the other side, that's probably in the book. Whereas on the other side, you have David, who is dancing in the temple courtyard with great joy to the point that his wife is kind of disgusted with what he's doing. But that seems to have an intimation of acceptance. So, I don't know, my read on this is that generally Jewish thought would say if negative emotions are controlling your actions, then you haven't won.
So you're disagreeing with me. You don't think we should have kosher hatred in our heart to fight evil?
I just don't like the word hatred. It's not a very, I don't think of it as a very Jewish value.
Okay, so I'm going to throw it back to Bret and to Elisha. I actually disagree. Let me tell you why I disagree. And Bret will go in order. You'll speak and then Elisha. I disagree because the whole reason that we think hatred is something unkosher is because of Christianity, not because of Judaism. In the Torah, it says that God hates evil. Ohavei Hashem sinu ra. Rabbi Mark Wiles is here, one of the great Jewish activists in all of New York. What does that mean? Ohavei Hashem. So I'm putting you on the spot here. Ohavei Hashem sinu ra.
Those who love God despise evil.
Those who love God hate evil.
But sorry, that sounds a lot like, hate the sin, not the sinner, right? It's the sin, sinu ra. It's the evil itself that you hate, not the person who's necessarily committed.
I hate that he's now studying Talmud and he can do that. That's not right. That was very not right. Good point. But evil becomes... The Nazis did not practice evil, they became evil, correct? You're not going to say the Nazis... There was no redemption for Hitler or... As we come up to the 80th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference, and again, Clive and Anya, we're doing our gala at Carnegie Hall on a very special day. Reinhard Heydrich didn't practice evil, he was evil. Adolf Eichmann, who was there, convened the meeting, did not practice evil, he was evil. If I ask you, what do you feel towards Reinhard Heydrich, Hitler, Eichmann, or Hezbollah, Hamas, who also are genocidal against Israel, what do you feel towards them?
So in other words, you don't feel you can win this debate without invoking the Hitler-Nazi clause?
That was a low blow. No, I can win the debate by...
Well, hang on a second.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I hesitate to side with Shmuley against Elisha because it's probably a bad idea.
I'm just here to be the punching bag.
But look, we live in a world in which we routinely meet people, we routinely, at least in the news, encounter people alive today, at work today, active today, who will be remembered in 50 or 100 years' time as the Heydrichs and Eichmanns and Himmlers, if not Hitlers, of their day. North Korea is a vast concentration camp. The acts being carried out against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang, which amount to genocide, that's absolute evil. What's happening in Myanmar, what happened with the Rohingya people, and what's happening now to the Burmese in general, at the hands of the military junta, some of whom I've met, as it happens, we're going to remember it that way. And I think that what Shmuley says is right, which is that I think it's too glib a distinction to separate the act from the actor. Ultimately, the former doesn't exist without the latter. And obviously, you have to make common sense moral distinctions between acts committed in the heat of passion or one-off acts versus consistent patterns of abuse and malice and evil. But when that consistent pattern is clear, I don't think the distinction between the act and the actor is a useful one. The genocide of Iraqis, and I really mean the genocide of Iraqis, ended the moment that a noose was placed around Saddam Hussein's neck. And whatever else you think of the war in Iraq from a strategic point of view, here was a man who was a one-man weapon of mass destruction, responsible for north of 1 million deaths, probably, if you include the Iran-Iraq war. Never mind the Anfal campaign, Halabja, the tens of thousands of Iraqis put through meat grinders and other sinister forms of execution and torture. So I actually have to say I side with Shmuley here. That there's a category of actors, there's a category of people who are with us now. And so it's not just a matter of don't invoke Hitler because that way you lose the argument. There's a term of art for that, I forgot what it is. But invoke people who are alive and abusing their fellow human beings today. And again, important to make distinctions, important to understand that Donald Trump, as much as you might hate him, is not Hitler, is not, Stalin or whoever. You have to make those moral distinctions, but in making those moral distinctions, you also have to allow for the fact that there are genuinely evil people at work in the world today.
I fully acknowledge, Bret, that there are genuinely evil people in the world today, and that we need to do something about them. I think I'm much more focused on a different axis when I...
Can everyone hear Elisha? Can everyone hear him?
Not so much, okay.
How about now? Now?
I'll eat the microphone.
Is that better? Okay.
So I'm much more focused on a different axis here, Bret and Shmuley, which is the rational versus the emotional, and what that does to the hater. And in my view, the very nature of hatred, to me, means that it is blinding, that in some way it is incapacitating your ability for rational thought, because a certain part of your brain is now active, which means others that may need to be are less active. So I don't disagree at all that there are evil people and evil forces in the world. I just believe that the best way to combat them is with as clear a head as one can have, because the battle is long, strategy and tactics are required, and an emotional hatred is exactly the sort of thing that might cause you to make a misstep.
Okay, well, let me throw this right back at Elisha. So, you're saying that hatred is going to blind us, and there is that expression of blind hatred, and we won't be able to focus on combating evil because we're going to be emotionally muddled. I feel the exact opposite. I feel that without leveraging kosher hatred, not blind hatred, but kosher hatred, which is directional, focused, and only a hatred of evil, we're actually removing from our arsenal our most powerful weapon, which is this righteous indignation, this feeling that these people are disgusting and they have to be stopped. Let's take, for example, and Bret, I appreciate what you said about Trump or Biden and all the disgusting partisanship that has us demonizing the other side, which is destroying America, because neither Democrats or Republicans are Nazis. It's gross when people talk that way. It's disgusting. But I'll tell you someone who does want to be a modern Hitler, and you take someone like Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who speaks openly about annihilating the Jewish people, destroying Israel. So, President Obama, who I believe was a friend of Israel, but he signed the Iran deal. He was not disgusted by their genocidal rhetoric. President Biden is definitely a friend of the Jewish people. He has been for his decades as a senator. I remember seeing him at every AIPAC conference for years and years before he was vice president, before he was president. But he's now insisting he's going to close the Iran deal. So I say to both of you, if I felt a sense of kosher hatred towards the Iranian regime, which annihilates its own people, shoots them in the streets, draws laser beads on their hearts, like in 2009, the Green Revolution, and shoots them in front of the eyes of the world unashamedly, or 2 years ago killed 1,000 people, Iranians, innocent protests, or funds Hezbollah, funds Hamas, and really has devalued Jewish life to a disgusting degree. If President Biden felt a certain moral revulsion, a certain hatred towards that genocidal rhetoric, I don't think he would ever sign a deal with them, because he would say to himself, these people disgust me, not the Iranian people, but the Iranian regime. And it's the excuse that they're not so bad that they can somehow change, which is what President Obama believed, for example. President Obama did not sign the Iran deal because he has something against Israel. That's garbage. President Obama increased funding to Israel significantly in his last few months of office. He wanted to protect Israel. I don't agree with his policies. He wanted to protect Israel. But the Iranian regime, he had no kosher hatred toward them. So he thought that if he gave them hegemony in the Middle East, they would change. And not only did they not change, they became worse and worse and worse. Now compare that to the Trump administration's decision that Qasem Soleimani, and a guy that you wrote an incredible column about in the New York Times, Bret, when he was eliminated by the Trump administration, the Trump people decided Qasem Soleimani is evil. They hate his guts. He doesn't deserve to live. Yes, it was a strategic decision, perhaps even also a tactical decision, because he was fomenting and orchestrating terrorism throughout the Middle East. But I think there was a certain moral revulsion in the Trump towards Qasem Soleimani, and everyone said there's going to be terrible repercussions, and there was nothing. Because the Iranians, like any bully, when you show them that we're determined, that they disgust us with their hatred, they back down. Why am I wrong? Bret, you go first, and then please, Elisha.
Well, now I do think you're wrong.
I guess I went too far.
So, look, there are rational and defensible, morally defensible reasons why an American president would make agreements with regimes that president knows to be detestable. And the obvious example here is the alliance that the United States had with Joseph Stalin in the Second World War. I think there's a wonderful quote from Winston Churchill, who said that if Hitler should invade a hell, Churchill would find a kind word for the devil in the House of Commons. There are perfectly defensible reasons to do that, but there's a distinction here that I think you're missing, and that perhaps actually strengthens your argument. And that's this. What bothered me about the dealings with Iran, I mean, I opposed the deal because I thought it was tactically foolish, not because, tactically and strategically foolish, not because I ruled out the possibility of talking to the Iranians. I ruled it out on strategic grounds, not moral grounds that you should never talk to a loathsome adversary. What I did find loathsome, however, was the way in which, too often, the Secretary of State Kerry, Wendy Sherman, other members of that team seem to simply lose sight of the fact that people like Javad Zarif are dyed-in-the-wool Jew haters. That their counterparts in the Iranian regime were people that they were capable of breaking bread with. And it's perfectly possible, by the way, to strike deals with people who you nonetheless don't try to humanize. Humanize is the wrong term, but don't become sympathetic to. That struck me as a very, very profound distinction, and something that was almost revolting in terms of those negotiations, when you would see Zarif and Kerry looking deeply into each other's eyes, as if, man to man, they had seen into each other's souls. That's, I think, what's really problematic, because it helps you lose sight of the kind of regime that you're actually dealing with in Iran. And this is, after all, a regime that shot hundreds of people in the streets just almost exactly 2 years ago, in December of 2019, simply because they were revolting against their diminished political and economic conditions. It's a regime that arrests women for wanting to wear wanting to show their hair in the streets. I mean, to me, it's one of it literally meets the description of being part of an axis of evil, if you take that word evil seriously.
Okay, Elisha?
Yeah, what he said.
What?
What he said.
What he said? Okay, let's because the subtitle.
I'd like to hear.
No, I'll bring Elisha in right now. Because the subtitle of this book, and by the way, is Adam Bellow here, editor of the book? So Adam Bellow will, God willing, come. Amazing editor. He edited 2 of my books already. The subtitle of this book is How to Fight Jew Hatred, Racism, and Bigotry. Those of you who know me and my career, I prefer to use the word calling, but my calling, from the time I started as a rabbi at the age of 21, I've really believed in bridges between the African American and Jewish communities. I've devoted my life to that. From the time that Cory Booker was my student president at Oxford beginning in 1992, to the special relationship we have with someone I wrote about just today in the Jerusalem Post, Robert Smith, America's foremost African American philanthropist and chairman of the board of Carnegie Hall, runs Carnegie Hall with Clive. So let's go to racism in the United States. A few years ago, another person who may come here tonight, I hope, my very dear friend Peter Noel, the renowned African-American journalist, we were on the radio together, and the Klan was marching through Times Square that day, if you remember this, like whatever it was, 17 years ago, and he told me that he doesn't hate the Klan. That he'll fight the Klan, he'll stop the Klan, he doesn't hate the Klan because you're not allowed to hate. What moral person would say they don't hate the Ku Klux Klan? And I bring that up also because, yeah, I find Larry David really funny, and I love Curb Your Enthusiasm, but he loves kind of koshering these taboo subjects. He spoke about how he would date a woman if he was in a concentration camp, if you remember that, on Saturday Night Live in his opening monologue. But the other night, very funny episode, he kind of made it seem like the Klan is not so bad. The Klan are killers, they're American terrorists, they are disgusting. I have no problem saying openly, I hate the Ku Klux Klan, I detest them. Elisha, do you have an issue saying that you hate the Klan?
I'll say it. I hate the Klan if it's some sort of a purity test, but I don't think that it's what we want to convey. You know, you use the word kosher before each of your many book titles, or at least some of them. I don't think we want to teach the word hate kind of in any context, because if I think about the values that we want to promote in the face of people who hate us, I think much more of how are we going to inculcate in our young people the sense of Jewish pride. You know what? They want to wipe us out. I'm going to double down and be more proud of who I am, and I'm going to fight like hell to make sure that we have a state of Israel where we can, you know, always know we can go to. I don't know the advantage of hating as opposed to a focused anger that you can channel that is useful. And I think that there is something about the word hatred that strikes me as being less useful, less in control, and it is still possible to have righteous indignation that one can channel and control and use effectively without it falling into hatred, which blinds.
Well,
Look, you know,
Bret, if Elisha is right, then why did Abraham Lincoln say he hated slavery? He used that language. Why did Churchill say he hated Hitler?
Hating an institution, I think Elisha would agree that hating an institution like the institution of slavery is different from, say, hating Jefferson Davis, right? That would be the argument, that even someone like Jefferson Davis, the right approach to someone who is you know, carrying the flag, literally the flag of this horrible treasonous regime, the Confederacy, that hatred isn't the right approach. And my answer to that is, you know, in the great tradition of Israeli philosophy, it's depend. You know, we have to be able to make distinctions. Look, you know, obviously I'm not a Christian, I'm Jewish. That being said, I think that Christianity is a psychologically very insightful. I mean, if you think of Christianity not as a faith, but sort of as a series of moral instrumentalities, there's some profound psychological insight about the concept of turning the other cheek. There's a profound psychological insight about the concept of hating the sinner and not the sin. And it's actually not just profound and effective, it's not just profound, it's I think very often effective in that you have to be able to make distinctions in the world between people who you intuit are capable of a certain kind of inner redemption, right? And people who are not. I think most ordinary people actually can change. I mean, there are a great many people, maybe even people in the Klan. In fact, I know there are people in the Klan because every now and then you read about a guy who says, you know, I used to be in the Klan, I've changed, you know, I hate who I once was. I hated that boy who was saturated with evil and hate and race hatred. And in those cases, if a concept of redemption, and if it's a Christian concept of redemption, is effective in changing who they are and how they think, I think there's something extraordinarily powerful about that, so long as the process is sincere and not a form of virtue signal. I just happen to think that there is this small category, relatively small category of people towards whom one can only feel hatred, because it is not just an emotion, it's a point of view that exists, and I think like many things, it has its place. I don't think that we should drop the F-bomb 40,000 times a day in our ordinary patterns of speech, but every now and then an F-bomb is the word you require. So I would use the word hate in the same sense. You know, my daughter typically hates her little sister. She doesn't mean it that way. You know, I typically hate something that I've read that's ticked me off in the paper. I don't really mean the word hate, but let's be discriminating in the best sense of the term and understand that there is a place, and maybe it's a small and very unique place, for a justified concept of hatred in the face of unmistakable evil, and something else, which is, I think, what Elisha is getting at, which is feeling, you know, contempt or some other word for different sorts of behavior that may be amenable to different responses.
I mean, I like contempt and feel that it has also a place in this vocabulary. I like disgust and feel it has a place in the vocabulary. I'm much more focused on what's useful and what I actually think is helpful. And, you know, maybe I have too much of an assignment of an emotional load to hatred. If hatred were simply what you described, and it's a point of view where one declares one's enemy to be the antithesis of what they stand for, and basically you say, that person across the table from me, everything they stand for, I stand for the opposite, and I'm 100% committed to defeating them on every possible battlefield because I think their ideas are so dangerous, and I feel anger as I do it, and I feel motivated. I don't know, that's okay with me, if that's how we choose to define hatred. But for me, there's a connotation to hatred that suggests that it can't be controlled, which is maybe where my father's comment that you started takes us back to.
Yeah, look, Elisha, everyone understands why your father might have felt that way, because the Holocaust was based on irrational hatred. But that, because the Nazis hated the Jews, does not mean that we can't have a kosher hatred against evil. I'm not going to let Hitler define my moral categories. And also, language matters. So it's not just righteous indignation. Bret, you said that Christianity is very humanly insightful. I agree. And yet, my audiences throughout my career have mostly been Christian and non-Jewish. And the reason? Because a lot of my Christian brothers and sisters, like when I wrote Kosher Jesus, wanted to discover the Jewishness that is to be found within Christianity, that is the origin of Christianity. And at times Christianity has moved away from strong Jewish roots, and I'll use it just in two examples. One is the idea of lust. I wrote Kosher Lust, because in marriage, lust is much more important than love. Desire and lusting after your spouse, much more important. I can prove it with one sentence. How many husbands or wives cheat on their spouses and later excuse what they did by saying, I never loved her. I loved you. Oh, really? But you lusted after her. So what did it matter? Lust is much more powerful than love. So why don't we speak about the lustful marriage and only the loving marriage? Because St. Paul dumped on lust. He said in the book of Hebrews that you should never have lust. You should be like me, celibate, but if you can't control your lust, you should marry, because marriage will kill your lust. Marriage kills desire. It'll make sure you're in a platonic relationship. Well, you know what? I think that men should lust after their wives and not look at porn. I believe that with all my heart. Lust is not a non-kosher thing. We've made it unkosher. And hatred is the same way. We're supposed to hate truly evil. And we're almost playing a game and saying that we shouldn't. Who here, if I asked you, what do you feel towards, sorry to go there again, Hitler, would tell me that you don't hate him? If I asked you about Hamas killing Jewish, Israeli teenagers, slaughtering them, or firing rockets to kill people in the kindergarten. If you don't, I would even say, if you don't hate evil, you have a broken moral compass. Let me add, Katie Couric has the #1 book in America today, and it's called Going There. So she actually mentions me in the book. It's a story about Michael Jackson, the date, okay. But I want to tell you something, because of the title Going There. I want to go there for a second. I'm going to say something controversial and ask Bret and Elisha to react. My very dear friend Adrian Kubicki is here. He's the Consul General of Poland. And there's a unfortunate divide right now between the Jews and Poland, which is ridiculous. Because Poland preserves all the death camps so that the 6 million are remembered. They do so much in the Jewish community, rehabilitating Jewish cemeteries, etc. But they're not perfect. They make mistakes. Israel makes mistakes. The Jewish people make mistakes. But you know one of the issues, and I'll be controversial here, and maybe I'm wrong, but one of the reasons that we end up having a divide between Poles and Jews is because we don't embrace kosher hatred. Whenever the Poles hear someone say something like, oh, the Poles and the Germans, they were just the same during the Holocaust. They were exactly the same. Wait a second. That's because you don't understand kosher hatred. We're supposed to hate the Nazis, hate the Gestapo, and the Poles, who have more righteous among the Gentiles in Yad Vashem than any other nation, but had some collaborators. We can dispute what... But they were invaded by the Germans. They were violated, destroyed, murdered by the Germans. We can work our differences out. The reason it gets bad is because when you don't hate the truly evil people, that's when you can no longer distinguish between the truly evil and people who may be your allies at times, or could have been better at times. And Adrian, I'm not speaking for you here. In fact, I was going to ask you to come up at the end and say something, but I would actually say, Elisha, no, wait one second. I would actually say, Elisha, that our inability to hate evil creates confusion when we should be directing it at a target that deserves it.
I'm not worried about my kids feeling all those negative emotions. I think that they come naturally to the human being. I don't think that one needs to write a book, personally. I mean, I'm glad you did, but I think that these things are there. I think what's needed when one faces enemies that are either out to wipe you out physically or existentially or spiritually is a clarity of purpose, a sense of where one comes from, a sense of the importance of continuing, and a sense that you will remove the enemies that are in your path for all the right reasons. That's how I think of how I want my kids educated. It's just a different view.
But there's a kind of discrimination which is about making distinctions. And that to me seems kind of the essence of all morality, of all serious moral thinking. One of the things that I truly hate is hatred towards groups. So expressions like "I hate the Poles," "I hate the Germans," "I hate the Russians" seem to me things that really should be absolutely ruled out of any form of kosher hatred. By the way, I hate the Iranians, I hate the Palestinians. You can think of contemporary expressions of group hatred which are just as disgusting because they lack quality of discrimination. And I think that's really important to our discussion. It's about that quality of being able to make distinctions, not only in terms of the severity of the crime, but the opportunity, the redeemability, if you will, of the person who commits it. And I suspect there is actually a very broad, we could probably be thinking a lot more thoughtfully about our criminal justice system if we mixed our revulsion at real criminality and violent criminality or hateful criminality with an understanding that redemption is also, the possibilities of redemption also need to be a part of the way in which we think about that specimen of wrongdoing or sometimes evil.
I had a big problem in Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, when all of a sudden, Darth Vader is, rehabilitated. All of a sudden, his ghostly apparition shows up next to Ben Kenobi, and, it's oh yeah, all's good now, here's a good soul, and he's smiling on the fate of affairs. I mean, the guy destroyed galaxies upon galaxies, he was a destroyer of worlds. So I never understood why he was rehabilitated, and I took that with me for quite some time.
Well, again, I'm so happy Adrian's here.
I have problems, Elisha, with anyone who likes the Star Wars franchise, but that's another subject.
But Elisha, when you speak about not rehabilitating evil, and that's why I wrote Kosher Hate, so that we have this revulsion, an emotion, an innate emotional repudiation of evil. That's what hatred is. And I accept what you said, Bret. They have to be discriminating, but Elisha, we just unveiled a carving of your father at the National Cathedral, and that night, I told you, I looked up the whole story because people were talking about it at the National Cathedral. When your father looked at a president of the United States who up to that time was considered the greatest friend Israel ever had, Ronald Reagan, your father spoke, he was Reagan was 10 feet in front of him when your father got the congressional.
Reagan was not the best friend Israel had ever
up until that time, he was. Of course, he was.
No.
Up until that time.
Do you remember the AWACS planes to
Yeah, I remember that. But your father stood in front of Reagan. He was warned that morning by the White House not to criticize the president's trip to Bitburg that would take place 2 days later, and by a strange, providential design of time, your father got the Congressional Medal at the White House, and your father looked at him and famously said, "That place is not your place." Your father would not forgive the SS. He would never. You don't think he kind of hated them, and that's what he was saying?
That was kind of the opposite of a hateful moment. My father was not consumed with anger or hate towards Reagan. He was.
Not Reagan, the SS.
Think about what my father did and whether this sounds like a man who was actively hating or whether this was a man who was feeling and also thinking. My father went so far as the day of that speech to print out a copy and make sure President Reagan saw it before he went up there, out of respect for the office, out of the thought that maybe this would be a last chance for President Reagan to overrule his advisors. My father took every possible step to treat someone who in that moment was an opponent of his with every bit of decency that he could. I must tell you, I remember that day, and I don't remember any of it being tainted with hatred. A lot of purpose, but no hatred.
You remember that day? You were sitting next to your phone?
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving up your spot here, Michelle.
This is Polish-Jewish reconciliation right here.
Right. First of all, I have to say that I agree with both of you, and I'm sorry, Rabbi.
You disagree with me?
I hate.
Why is he speaking?
I hate using words hate, because hatred always bears this great amount, this very heavy amount of something that was a cause in the history of the biggest tragedies, and it cannot be used otherwise. I mean, we can try, but it comes down. I think the definition of kosher hate comes down to the pure distinction of something which we could call pure good and pure evil. And I don't think that there is any doubt that historically speaking, Jews and Poles were on the same side of the history. Atrocities that has been committed to both of our nations were great, but then the history is full of details. And obviously when the time goes by, we might find ourselves in a situation where we put questions on everything, and with the questions come concerns and more questions, and it's becoming confusing. And I think it comes down to something what we should all remember, that the evil will always be evil and the good will always be good, no matter what. And it also applies to the truth. So the condemnation of any form of hate, I think it's crucial here. If I think that humanity ever touched the very bottom, I think it was the Second World War. So we should remember, because we know, that gives us this huge and very painful lesson that we know from the Second World War what the evil is, really. We can touch that, we can sense that, we know the definition now after what happened during the Second World War. So coming back to the relations things, I think we can work it out, let's say, as long as we remember this great distinction. And in that sense, I agree that we should hate any forms of relativization of the good and evil. And we should work on together, actually, hand in hand, all of us, despite of our nationality, background or anything, towards keeping and keeping in mind that this definition cannot be changed, and the evil will always be evil, and the good will always be good. And we need to know in our heart. It seems like something that is easy to be done, but it's not. Sadly, these both terms are used for the political score, maybe sometimes. But we as human beings should always know, and I'll tell you, you're my brother here, my Jewish brother here in New York, and I very cherish our friendship, and I know that you and I understand what's the truth and what's the evil and what's the good. And I think we should start from that, and each and every one of us should start from
So
that.
let me just say, Adrian, agreed, but I'm going to give everybody one last comment, and then we're going to end the discussion, and I'm so grateful.
I think there were one or two questions from the crowd as well.
Well, let me give everyone of the panelists one last comment, and then we'll see what we have time for. But let me just say this, and you know, with Bret hovering above me. Bret Stephens is a mentor to me. I go to him with a lot of personal moral questions because he has tremendous moral clarity. He's a very courageous guy. He's an amazing friend. But Bret, I have to say, is my final comment on this panel, I don't agree with you about generalizing. I have no issue whatsoever, and I'm going to rehabilitate kosher hatred no matter how much people want to stop it. I have no problem saying I hate Hamas. They are a group, and I hate them. They are disgusting, they're revolting, they're bloodthirsty, they want to kill people. And the fact that we can't say it is morally problematic. I have no problem saying I hate the Iranian regime, which is a group, the mullahs who kill people and threaten the genocide of the Jewish people. I have no problem saying I hate the Nazis, not the Germans, but the Nazis. I have no problem saying any of that. And you've been you're the courageous voice of the New York Times, while everyone sucks up to China, because all of our stuff is made in China, and to get an iPhone that only costs $1,000 instead of, it would have cost $3,000 if it was made in the US, we have sold our souls completely, because we can't say we hate the Chinese communist regime, which you said is guilty of genocide. If we can't say that, we have a broken moral compass. And come on, Adrian. The Polish people were brutalized, slaughtered by the Nazis. You want to tell me that even as a diplomat, who has to be very diplomatic, and you're a great diplomat, and I reciprocate, you're my Polish brother, I have deep love for you and deep respect. You've also become the sexiest ambassador in all of New York. Look at me, man. You have a problem saying that you hate the Nazis? Seriously? You have a problem saying that? How could that be problematic? I have a problem with some people who can't say that, who are going to dance around it. Elisha saying we should dance around it. I feel moral revulsion, repudiation.
Sorry.
I passed your purity test. I said I hate the Nazis.
Okay, so that's all I have to say. Bret, Elisha, and then Adrian. Bret, go ahead.
Well, obviously there's a distinction between hating people who have voluntarily joined groups that are defined in turn by their hateful ideology. So I think it's legitimate to hate the Nazis. So it's, for example, it's different from hating the Germans. Just as it's legitimate to hate Hamas because it's a group organized to wipe out the Jewish people. It's not representative of the Palestinian people, and that's a distinction that has to be made. Although I will say that even within these groups, you have to make distinctions. There are members of Hamas who have essentially been forced to join. There were members of the Nazi youth, for example, who were also essentially forced to join. One of them was Pope Benedict, the former Pope. So again, I just come back to this view that you just have to insistently make distinctions and understand that you have to look very, very carefully at the conduct and weigh a whole number of factors before you get around to using the word hate. However, there are occasions, again, where that word is totally appropriate, and it's to my mind, I don't want to say perverse, but strange to try to shy away from the word when it really fits. I just think it fits much more seldomly than we would make it seem.
Okay, Elisha?
I'm just going to finish with that quote from the daf that I just looked up.
Yeah.
It says, Amar Ravina, "Afilu hachmi ba'ilei le'enush le'melach nafsha b'nichota." Nevertheless, a person must train himself to be calm.
I'm going to take that as a personal rebuke. No wonder you wouldn't study that page with me today. And now you see that? That's like, that was all about me. You see that Elisha has that glint in his eye as he says that you have to be calm. Okay, Adrian. You really can't say you hate the Nazis?
And if I may,
Yes.
I'll follow up on that. So yes, I can say that, but I think that every time we say that, we must admit that this is the ultimate statement, and it means that all other attempts to converted into something else failed, and that happens obviously. So we do have that feeling as many Polish people, most all of them, and me personally, I can also say that. The question is, what's the purpose and what's the reason of using the term? I think that when we call it evil, like all the examples you gave tonight, it's just easier to understand what happened. The question is, what's the purpose of using the term hate, and even worse? What's
To fight them.
What's the
Use it to
purpose?
fight them.
What's the purpose to feel the hate?
If I feel the hate, I'll fight them and I'll stop them from hurting innocent people.
Well, there are other ways to do it. As I said,
They've been ineffective. They've been ineffective.
It's the very
different
ultimate.
story.
It's the very ultimate thing to feel, and ultimate thing to do. The question is, can we do it otherwise? And there is a huge distinction, by the way, when we talk about something that is happening as we speak, and a great distinction if we try to sum up and sort of understand what happened in the past, so it not happens again. That's the only little step from hating the Nazis to hating the Germans, by the way. But understanding that what happened during the Second World War was pure evil, I think it's enough for education purposes. You don't have to apply hate to it.
When white supremacist groups rise now and they want to embrace the same ideology, unless we hate them and what they represent, we won't fight them. We won't stop them. And that's why we've been ineffective. Evil continues. You know, genocide it's every day now.
So Rabbi, it's not about relativization. As I said, it has to be said what's evil and what's good, and there's no question on that. I think that we come up to the conclusion, I sense from that conversation, that we understand hate in at least two different ways. One way, which is the hate as a tool to fight something that we disagree with, which we call evil when we cannot agree with that, we cannot put up with that. And the hate, which is the reason, the primary reason of the worst what happened to humanity in it. So I think that this term might be broader than we think initially, and probably we would need two words, as Bret said. Sometimes it's legitimate to say the word "I hate something," but I guess we don't mean the same thing every time.
Okay, well, the time is 8:15, and I said this panel. The book launch is officially over. I'm sorry if we can't get the questions, but you can speak to the panelists individually. We're just party time, okay? You gotta celebrate. Let me just thank everybody. First and foremost, by the way, Adrian, I also want to say, I'm very grateful to President Duda of Poland, who yesterday condemned extremists who were calling for the annihilation of the Jewish people. He said it was an abomination. He said it violated everything Poland. So I think he hates their rhetoric, and we're grateful for that.
I said, this is exactly what I said. This is just naming something that was evil and wrong.
But he called it out, and he said it was an abomination.
In the terms which they're supposed to be called.
Okay. And Adrian took me to President Duda a few times. I was recently with him about a month ago. And okay, Bret, thank you for joining us. I'm looking up at you. I don't know if you know that.
Happy birthday.
Bret, you are such a great light of the Jewish people to the world. Everyone here loves you and respects you and looks up to you. You should know that. As you sit alone and as you recuperate from your positivity, know how much we love you and respect you, and you're a great paragon of Jewish values to the world. Elisha, you are...
Thank you so much.
God bless you. Thank you, Bret. Elisha, you are your father's son in every sense of the word. You represent all of the morality, the goodness. I cherish our friendship. You are my soul brother, Yedid Nefesh. Thank you for being here tonight. I knew you disagree with me, but I love people who disagree with me because I love knowing that they're wrong. And seeing how wrong you are gives me a tremendous feeling of infinite validation. So thank you for providing that on my birthday. Adrian, thank you for everything, all the friendship to the Jewish people. I hope you, being close to Prime Minister Morawiecki and President Duda, I know that you can play a vital role in bringing tremendous healing and brotherhood between the Polish peoples and the Jewish peoples, God willing, and you're a tremendous friend to our community. We're very grateful. Let me just thank a couple of people, and we'll go to our party. My daughter, Mushki, who principal organizer of the party tonight. I love you, baby girl. Thank you very much. My colleague and brother, Gabriel, wherever you are, Gabriel, my son, Mendy, did a lot of the primary research for the book Kosher Hate. He's the best researcher I've ever encountered. Mendy's the best. Mendy's here tonight. Mendy got a huge shout out in the book. My buddy Richard Rubenstein, who's done our publicity for God many years, and Michael Kozovsky's here as well from Rubenstein. Richard, I can't believe you turned up. I can't believe that you actually found it important enough for you to actually turn up. What? Well, Pat Bransford is here. You brought a very good friend and a bunch of other friends. I have so many close friends that are here. Hello, Galina. So nice to see you. I can't believe that your daughter had to ask me if you should come. Are you kidding? She should ask if she can come.
Yeah, I think so.
No, Anya, you never have to ask that. You have to ask me about your mom, seriously? I know your mom longer than I know you. Okay, there's so many other friends. If I go on, I feel bad that Dan Ravi can't ask this question now. Now he's gonna say something bad about us on I-24 or something like that.
Stalk away.
But you can. Hello, Michael, the Chabad spokesperson. You just slipped in like that. You've been all. Michael, you're not the Chabad spokesperson, right? But the guy to your left is. But you could be. All you need is a beard. I don't want to go on and on. My friend Chaim Miller, one of the foremost Jewish scholars in the entire world, is here tonight. Author of some of the greatest books in the whole world. Amazing. I could go on. I don't want to. If I start mentioning people, I'm going to start. Catherine, my buddy. Hello, Catherine. How are you? I haven't seen you in so long. Phil, proudest Jew in the world. Marjorie, you're here as well. Who else today? Miss anyone? Okay. Danny, Abraham. We may be doing a deal, maybe. And above all else, my wife Debbie, I want to thank her for being the luckiest woman in the world, for having exceptional taste in men,